it will become particularly politically toxic if Putin and Xi and the rest of the BRICS countries get together and decide that they're going to abandon the US dollar and rely on gold in part to settle their trade imbalances, which thus would necessarily, in the eyes of many gold bulls, cause the price of gold to skyrocket. Well, in that circumstance, the propaganda is easy. Gold holders are puppets of Putin. Gold owners are unpatriotic.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and this is the Miles Franklin Weekly Special for May 16th through May 23rd, 2023, while supplies last. This week we feature the silver Krugerrand at $3.99 over spot. For years, the Krugerrand was the most known bullion coin in the world, and in 2017, the South African Mint and Rand Refinery began minting a silver counterpart to the famed gold Krugerrand. The silver Krugerrand bear the springbok antelope on one side and the portrait of Paul Kruger on the other, and have a face value of 1 rand. They come 25 to a tube, 500 to a monster box, they are IRA eligible and are renowned for recognizability and design. Best of all, they are only $3.99 over spot while supplies last. To order this special or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with Liberty and Finance. And back with us today is our good friend Doomberg from the very popular Doomberg Substack, actually the #1 financial contributor on Substack. Doomberg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Elijah, pleasure to be back with you. I always enjoy our discussions, and I know today's going to be no different.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. I would like to discuss what we're seeing in the cryptocurrency sphere. We're seeing the IRS going after FTX and that whole scandal there, and also kind of the greater regulation we're seeing in the crypto sphere, because I know a lot of people on our channel are interested in precious metals, but this kind of regulation that's going on right now in crypto could also be applied to precious metals. So if we could start on, what is happening with Bitcoin and crypto right now?
Yeah, so two separate topics. We'll lead with the what our friend Nick Carter has called Operation Choke Point 2.0, as far as the regulation of the crypto sector. We're of the mindset that the vast majority of crypto is essentially fraud, but that doesn't mean that we can't or shouldn't be uncomfortable with the tactics, the legal tactics that are being used, and in many cases, the extra legal tactics that are being used to crack down on the industry in what is obviously a coordinated, multi-agency, accelerated crackdown on the space. And we wrote a piece a couple of weeks ago, which I'm sure you're referencing, called Golden Handcuffs, where we made the point that many of the same tactics that are being used and misused, we believe, by federal regulators could very easily be turned and be used on holders of gold and particularly physical gold. And this would be especially pertinent if, say, the BRICS countries create a new currency and decide to settle their international trade imbalances using gold at the heart of a mix of commodities to do so, and that causes the price of gold to spike. It would be very easy for the government to use the same set of propaganda and sort of extra legal techniques that they've been squeezing the crypto industry with to turn around and do the same thing in the gold sector. And this stance of ours that we could be sort of broadly anti-crypto, but still sort of defending their legal rights does confuse some people. We don't view them as intellectually juxtaposed against each other in any way, shape, or form. The name of this podcast is Liberty and Finance, and wherever you see liberty under threat, you have to consistently be opposed to such threats. And the way in which the federal agencies are going after crypto in many ways is quite suboptimal from the perspective of those with a more libertarian / liberty mindset. With respect to the IRS and FTX, we're putting a piece out on this. Tentative title is Uncle Sam Has Entered the Chat. A couple of weeks ago, the IRS made an enormous claim against the estate of Sam Bankman-Fried's former empire. And, best estimates are there's somewhere between $5 to $7 billion of tangible value to be recovered and split up amongst the creditors. But the IRS just filed a $44 billion claim against the suite of companies that were sort of under Bankman-Fried's umbrella. And even beyond that, it looks like they're going after crypto holders for, unrealized or for capital gains taxes on assets that have since been stolen and are unlikely to be recovered, in large part because the IRS is going to swoop up most of the recovery. So it really is a raw deal for a lot of the holders of the cryptocurrency, which again is just another reason to never get involved in such things, because the government has overtly said they're against it, and they can and will make their life very difficult for you to make a point.
And the interesting thing is that a lot of the, I guess you could say, the reason that the government doesn't like it, or the claimed excuses, for all of this regulation, can also be applied to precious metals. Cryptocurrency can be used for money laundering. It can be a whole lot of different bad things can be used for it. Obviously, just because something can be used for evil doesn't make itself evil, right? But it's a way that, the government then can clamp down on it. So how could the same regulation be applied to precious metals?
So I'll give you one tangible example. In the same way that they're basically using access to the banking system to choke off the fiat rails into and out of crypto, right? They're squeezing the banks. Signature Bank was basically seized, and Silvergate went out of business, and even Silicon Valley Bank had a pretty strong tie to the VC firms that were funding and underwriting a lot of these sort of crypto pump and dump schemes. The control knobs are very easily accessible. The correspondent banking system is well understood, and word has gone out to the management of these banks that if you don't want to end up like Signature, then you have to stop doing all business with crypto whatsoever, which is why you're seeing various, users unable to withdraw funds from pick your favorite, global cryptocurrency exchange, because they're losing access to banking. If you think about gold, the major refiners where gold is basically converted to spec and, purity and punched into 100 kilogram or 400 kilogram bars. Those are point sources of basically supply chain power that the government can say, like, this is going to stop now. And so they exist in the fiat world, and they will listen to their government overlords, even if it means, ending certain line of business. And as you said, and as we pointed out in the piece, like, gold is used for money laundering. Gold is indistinguishable. In fact, we wrote a piece about the dangers involved in the government cracking down on a piece of software. In this case, it was Tornado Cash, which is a Bitcoin mixer or cryptocurrency mixer. And what that allows you to do is to anonymize your crypto. You send in your crypto from your regular wallet, and then you get back a key that only you know, and then you could take your crypto back out from a completely different wallet, and it makes it very difficult for government regulators to observe the sort of history of your ownership of that crypto. And the real main use case for that, of course, is money laundering. But there are other legitimate reasons why you might want to mix your crypto, like maybe you want to make a private donation and you don't want to tie that donation to, say, the Donald Trump campaign or the Hillary Clinton campaign to your main wallet out of fear of political retribution. They sanctioned that piece of software. The exact same analogy really holds for these refiners. They are effectively the crypto mixers for gold. If you get some stolen gold or some, gold that relies on child labor at the mine site, or pick your favorite reason why you might not want to own that particular atom of gold, once it gets mixed into these refiners, it's not like there's any way you could trace the atomic history of the gold that is now in the quote unquote authenticated system. And so all of the exact same arguments that have been levied against crypto apply to gold. And it will become particularly politically toxic if Putin and Xi and the rest of the BRICS countries get together and decide that they're going to abandon the US dollar and rely on gold in part to settle their trade imbalances, which thus would necessarily, in the eyes of many gold bulls, cause the price of gold to skyrocket. Well, in that circumstance, the propaganda is easy. Gold holders are puppets of Putin. Gold owners are unpatriotic, and gold owners are helping to facilitate money laundering and the sex trafficking and pick your favorite, sin. And all of the arguments used against crypto can be used against gold, which is only one of the many reasons why, regardless of your views of crypto, you should be very sensitive when the government stretches the boundaries of the law to achieve political objectives. Even if you agree with the political objectives, that's the time to be on your highest guard, because we all learned after 9/11 that, it didn't stop with just taking off your shoes at the airport. Like, the surveillance state is pervasive now, and it's unthinkable that the country would be what it is today 25 years ago. And so this is the sort of incrementalism of government power that one needs to be constantly on guard for.
Now, a lot of people, when they hear, gold confiscation, for example, obviously this has happened in the past. The U.S. nationalized gold. It was illegal to hold gold for many, many decades there. But a lot of people are skeptical that would really, how that would go over with the American people. People just, a government official going door to door requesting the gold. Many people point out that it would be easier to simply confiscate the gold from ETFs or the main warehouses where gold is stored. Your perspective on that, do you see any real risk of people just holding gold in their own possession or, vaulted outside of the banking system?
Look, ultimately, you, Elijah, and I, Doomberg, would have a decision to make. Do we want to overtly break the laws of the country? I, for one, have said on other podcasts, and I'll repeat here, that if gold becomes outlawed and they confiscate it in return for, quote, fair market value, I will be turning in my gold. I exist in the fiat system. I'm a law-abiding citizen of the country. I have children that are getting into be college age. I have friends and family. And by the way, the percentage of people in the country who actually own a meaningful amount of physical gold outside of jewelry is quite low. And it would be very easy to isolate such people and to go after them. And so, sure, it would be difficult for the government to prove that I still own all of the gold eagles I've bought and that, APMEX has on file for me having purchased, and I have no record of having sold them, because if I did and I made a profit, I would have to declare taxes on that. It's probably traceable, but the point is, if something is overtly illegal, the vast majority of people will abide by the law. And yes, of course, you can hide your gold and transport its value decades into the future, but at that point, how are you going to reintroduce it? You have to effectively launder it back into the system or admit that you committed a crime for all these decades. And so people like to talk tough, on Twitter especially, or make fun of our position that we would turn in our gold. When push comes to shove, very few people will overtly break the law, especially if the government clamps down hard. And there's a very good possibility that they might.
And do you see that it would be fruitful at all to consider different possibilities? Some people say, if you invest in pre-33 coins or only U.S. coins, they won't be confiscated. Do you find that is fruitful at all in your own consideration in this, like what kind of gold to invest in, or just, if they make it illegal, I'll turn it all in?
If they make it illegal, they're going to be thorough in so doing. Like the analogies here are, yes, sure, I could open up a Swiss bank account and hope the IRS never finds out. Technically, you're supposed to declare all of your foreign bank accounts to the IRS. Many Americans don't. And sometimes those banks turn over such information to the IRS, and then all of those Americans are in some amount of legal jeopardy. Again, I would much rather win the argument before the law gets changed, which is why we're trying to, promote and highlight the dangers involved and the secondary or impacts of the government's crypto crackdown, than to decide consciously that we're going to be basically closet felons. And I think the vast majority of people would turn in their gold. Like, I own physical gold. It is a relatively meaningful part of the subset of my portfolio that I view as sort of savings, as real assets, land, and collectibles, and so on. But it's not a huge percent of my net worth, and it's certainly not worth going to jail for. And, in the extreme case, here's the thing that we're going to mention in the piece perhaps tomorrow is, like, every year, the IRS asks you this little trap question as to whether or not you own any cryptocurrencies. You may be familiar with it on, your Form 1040, check the box if you own, mined, or basically had anything to do with crypto. And we have, with a clean mind, check no every year. There are lots of people who own and participate in crypto who check no every year, and they're basically breaking the law. And if the IRS, if and when the IRS decides to do something about it, they have exposed themselves to legal jeopardy. Now, I don't know you that in private life, but I suspect you're a law-abiding citizen, and you don't overtly go about trying to break the law. Is gold the thing that you're going to make your final stand on with the government, and you're going to protect it with the bullets in your safe? I mean, I don't know. I think that's a very small number of people for whom this is the hill that they're willing to die on.
Now, gold has really played a major role for central banks right now. They've been accumulating gold at a record pace. For example, this last year, 2022, and the first quarter of this year, it seems like gold is still seen as a monetary metal. Silver, however, isn't as much. Central banks don't really accumulate silver. However, in the past, it has been a monetary metal. But do you see, if gold is confiscated, nationalized, or, the government says you have to turn it in, do you think they'll do the same for silver?
I do not, for a variety of reasons. First and foremost, you are correct. The primary reason the government would be motivated to do this is because gold would be playing a role in dethroning the US dollar in international trade. Like, absent that fundamental assumption, the likelihood of gold being confiscated is low. And I would say, by the way, this is all a theoretical conversation, I would put the odds of it happening at very low. But it's still possible, as you mentioned, it happened in the 30s. Silver is not a monetary metal in the way that gold is. It is not being accumulated by central banks, as you correctly noted. But most importantly, it has substantial industrial use in ways that gold does not. And the free trade of silver is absolutely critical to, for example, the growth of the solar rollout. And one of the main industrial use for silver is, in fact, in solar panels. And this is set to grow in the future. And the government will be keenly interested in making sure there's enough new silver supply brought online to, meet that demand as solar grows and is mandated to grow, both in Europe and in the U.S. and the rest of the world, the U.S. in particular, because of the fire hose of cash being thrown at the problem by the Inflation Reduction Act. And so silver is not a threat to the U.S. dollar, and silver has substantial industrial uses that I think underpin a bullish case for silver in a way that doesn't exist for gold, so to be totally transparent. But silver, of course, is notoriously difficult to trade. It's up there with natural gas as far as sort of widowmaker trades that people dabble in and often lose money.
Now, I did want to turn to viewers' questions here. So we have about 3 questions here regarding the debt ceiling and the U.S. debt. The first kind of 2 questions are asking the same thing. How big of a deal do you think the U.S. having $30+ trillion in debt really is? And is this debt ceiling issue even, it seems like every time they raise the debt ceiling, it's no big deal, but and it's kind of theater. But your perspective on that, is the debt an actual issue, and is the debt ceiling an actual issue right now?
So I think the debt is becoming an ever more actual issue as interest rates remain elevated, and the cost to refinance that debt and the interest payments associated with it. I believe interest on the debt had just surpassed total investment in the U.S. military for the first time. And it seems unsustainable at these levels and would tend to make one ponder the potential prospects of hyperinflation if it goes on long enough. As it pertains to the debt ceiling drama, which, as you mentioned, is a sort of rite of passage in Wall Street, we view that as sort of a Pascal's wager situation. You wouldn't bet against the existence of God. There's just no upside to it. The prospect of a U.S. default is so staggering that it's unimaginable that political intervention at the right moment won't occur. And this is a lot of sort of a bit of false drama as well. Like, there's other expenditures the government could put on hold while it services the interest and debt payments that are coming due during the period of time where such negotiations are still ongoing. It's testimony to how entitled the Washington, D.C. politicians have become, that the prospect of not paying a few government employees for a week or two is so catastrophic that they're pretending as though the first thing they wouldn't do is pay the interest on the debt. Now, having said that, I think the whole concept of a debt ceiling is silly, and the whole concept of a debt ceiling is actually illogical, because all of the spending that's going on has been authorized by Congress. So on the one hand, Congress has authorized all of the spending, and on the other hand, separately, in an unrelated bill, has mandated a cap on the amount of debt that the U.S. can issue to fulfill congressional mandates. And so, to the extent that this is a tool for political theater and a tool to extract concessions from one side or the other to make this roll, it will eventually get settled. The consequences of it not getting settled are unthinkable. And as a general rule, but I'm reminded of, in the 80s, when the Cold War was still going on, every time there was sort of a nuclear threat, the stock market would crash. Those were great days to buy, because if you're wrong, it doesn't matter. I would bet against the debt ceiling situation going fully nuclear. And if you're wrong, well, it doesn't matter, because we all have much bigger problems to worry about.
No, kind of, again, one of the viewers is asking kind of when does it become an issue? Because I know there's this famous financial radio show host out there who says, the kind of the end of the world regarding the U.S. debt has been predicted many times, and it always is false. You just keep seeing the debt rise and we're okay. When does it actually become an issue in your mind?
So when does the debt load become an issue, or when does the debt ceiling showdown become an issue?
When does the debt load become an issue?
Yeah, well, again, our friend Luke Roman has been writing pretty persuasively on this. If you just sort of do the math on deficit spending going forward, absent radical increases in taxes, which will be politically unacceptable, it's hard to see how we get out of the spiral, especially if interest rates sort of remain elevated. And we're going to sort of fight inflation in the process. And in fact, our interest rates could be fueling inflation to the extent that they are limiting financing of much needed energy projects, especially in the shale patch. And so it is again, the spiraling hyperinflationary aspects of the U.S. Budget situation have been sort of Chicken Little for a very long time. But when interest on the debt exceeds, the military budget or the budget for entitlements, and the rolling over of the debt and the refinancing of it at these new interest rates is only just beginning. And then when you ponder just the tiny nature of the duration profile of the U.S. government debt, i.e., most of it is in short-term notes and needs to be rolled over in the next 2, 3, 4 years, it becomes pretty interesting to ponder. And in fact, this is why I think the market has been pricing in interest rate cuts far too aggressively compared to what the Fed is actually doing, because it just can't believe that the U.S. can roll over all this paper at 6% interest. And if it does, it doesn't take too much of a mathematician to see how that crowds out tax receipts. And historically, whenever interest rates, are the primary reason you're issuing new debt, you're very close to sort of hyperinflationary spirals. And so I don't know, like it's hard to imagine a world where the U.S. enters into, a prolonged period of ultra high inflation, but at the same time, all the numbers are there. It's going to be scary and fascinating to watch. And one of the reasons why we own physical gold, to go back to the previous question. But and again, turning in your gold might be something the government forces you to do in order to sort of reset the currency. But these are all, very far sort of black swan events, very far to the right of the sort of tail of possible outcomes. But they seem more likely, and if they do happen, it will be very obvious in hindsight what transpired, right? And so it's getting to the point where, at 30 trillion in debt, and you apply a 5 or 6%, price tag on 30 trillion. Well, that's a lot of trillions just for interest. And last I checked, we collect about 3 trillion in tax receipts, and maybe 4 in a good year. And if the stock market goes down, that shrinks. And so the deficits get bigger, and they have to be financed by somebody. And who's going to monetize that debt? Well, clearly it's probably going to be the Fed. And so there are serious people with sober estimates that the Fed balance sheet will grow to 50 to 60 trillion in the next decade. Even though we're in this period of QT today, if those people are right, what does the world look like? Hard to model.
It is so interesting because there's a sense maybe of normalcy bias where it's like, I don't even believe it that we could see, the Fed balance sheet go to 50 or 60 trillion. It seems like then where would inflation be? That's not the world that we grew up in, right? When we see, high inflation or hyperinflation, it seems hard to believe that something like that could even happen in the US.
And when we were coming of age professionally, the balanced budget fight was a real one. Now both sides have basically advocated their duty, right? And so this is why this is like mostly theater. It's really amazing. We've just become used to a $1 trillion budget deficit, Elijah. Like this is nothing now. It barely makes a headline. It's incredible.
It definitely is incredible. We have a question on precious metals that you mentioned there, kind of that's insurance against this. Tracy is wanting to know, I keep hearing that gold is not an investment, but insurance. But that term has a really broad meaning. If gold in theory can never go to zero, then it is much more than an insurance policy with a term. What kind of insurance is gold like?
Yeah. So I don't view gold as, I mean, some people characterize gold as insurance, but insurance is a bet that you don't ever want to claim. The best kind of insurance is unclaimed insurance. And so if I pay $100 a month to insure my home, I'm not looking for a $1,200 refund at the end of the year because my home didn't burn down. I'm happy that my home didn't burn down, and I pay the $1,200 again the next year. Gold is more a preservation of purchasing power. So in my mind, 20 American Gold Eagles is roughly the value of a mid-sized SUV today. And if I hand my children those 20 American Gold Eagles in 20 years, I suspect they will be able to buy a mid-sized SUV with those 20 Gold Eagles. And so I view it more as a inflation hedge saving device than I would an insurance policy. The insurance policy comes with, because the cost of holding gold is de minimis, whereas insurance is leaky, right? I mean, you pay it and you hope you never have to claim it. And so we view gold as a savings vehicle in the real assets category, consistent with land and collectibles and fine art, as a way of sort of raising the floor of your net worth independent of the government's ability to inflate it away. And so if we did go into a period of hyperinflation, for example, our net worth would be the sum of the things we own that are real, that are useful, that are tangible, that we could port to the other side of that hyperinflationary environment. And gold is very easy to port, assuming it's legal to do so, to that other side of the hyperinflationary environment.
Now we have a viewer's question on central bank digital currency. Sarge asks, do you see the implementation of FedNow in July as a catalyst for a crash? Also, what is your opinion on Florida and Indiana passing bills banning central bank digital currency? Yeah,
so the latter part is important. The balkanization of U.S. politics is a real threat. And in fact, Daniel DiMartino Booth was just on the Grant Williams podcast and spoke openly as though it was a real possibility that Texas and Florida would secede from the U.S. If things break a certain way vis-a-vis the debt ceiling and the hyperinflationary environment that we were just discussing. And the reassertion of state power is a threat to the union of the U.S., actually, in many ways. And we are entering into a period where, with the sort of flow of people out of the coast, conservative-minded people out of the coast mostly, leaving behind a more concentrated version of a sort of more liberal mindset in California and New York in particular, and Massachusetts. And those people sort of congregating and increasing the populations of Texas and Florida and some of the more sort of southern conservative states, you're going to see the red states becoming redder and the blue states becoming bluer, and the reason that they are unioned in this country becoming less and less meaningful to people in those states. And in fact, you're even seeing within California, Northern California is looking, and parts of Oregon are looking to break away from, the madness that's going on in Sacramento. And frankly, I don't blame them. And so you're seeing, we believe, the central bank digital currency stance is just one of many that the red states are sort of laying down the law in their own territories and saying we're not going to submit our citizens to these government mandates. And so the analogy, of course, would be COVID and the way in which many states in the country decided to tackle the pandemic versus the way many of the sort of more blue states did, and really sort of shocking differences. I personally remember like showing up in Nashville near the end of the COVID crisis, and the stark difference between the way things were handled in that state versus the state that I currently live in was really amazing and was like mind blowing. And there really are becoming two different countries. That's sad, of course. This is not the desired outcome, but the stance on central bank digital currencies by these states is just another symptom of a greater disease, which is the polarization and balkanization of the United States. And I do think that succession risk in the U.S. is vastly underestimated by the markets, and something that could come on people's radars in a period of 2 to 3 years.
That is very interesting. I didn't really put two and two together that this could lead to secession, because, I mean, a currency is a very important part of a country, right? So if some states are saying, we're just not going to use this platform for the currency, it seems like that kind of is the first stage of secession, even though obviously I don't think central bank digital currencies are a good idea. But I think, it seems like that definitely is saying, we don't want to abide by what the nation is doing.
Yeah, if your listeners have the opportunity, go find that Daniel Demeter Booth appearance on the Grant Williams podcast. It's behind the paywall, but it's the best money you can spend in the business, I believe. Grant does a great job, and she's actually pretty thought-provoking on the topic and really sort of made me stop and think about it and hadn't really looked at it through that lens. But Texas is not going to put up with this, right? Florida is not going to put up with this. And so you just take all manner of issues, gun laws, pick your favorite hot button social issue. The disparity between what the average Texan believes and what the average New York resident believes has never been higher. And what's the point of them being in the same country? And Texas always kind of views itself as a separate country, most equal among equal states as it is. And so it's not crazy to think that Texas would say we've had enough. The whole border issue and all the things that we would never write about, but we're aware of and they're in the news. That this is becoming real and is a real risk, we believe.
Now we have a viewer's question relating to the banking system. The viewer asks, how secure are CDs under $250,000 from a bail-in situation?
Well, far be it from us to give people investment advice. I would say that in the entire history of the United States, nobody with money on deposit at a bank, either in checking, saving, or CDs, has ever lost a dollar if they were under the FDIC insurance limits. In a world where mom and pop with $100,000 in a bank are expected to bail in after we've bailed out the multimillionaires of Silicon Valley with that bank collapse, in that world where people are losing money on deposit at a bank, we've got far bigger problems to worry about than the $100,000 that you have on deposit at that bank. And so in our own lives and in the organizations that we advise, we are very comfortable keeping right up to the FDIC insurance limits on deposit at any bank, even if it's on the cusp of failure, simply because it's unimaginable that Congress wouldn't make small depositors whole. And in the case where they didn't, all hell would break loose.
One last question here for you regarding, again, the U.S. debt. And it kind of ties into the banking system, because one of the main reasons we saw the banking system have so many issues is because banks bought long-term treasuries, and obviously with interest rates rising, those have fallen. The viewer asks, if everyone knows that the U.S. will never pay its debt, why do all governments buy the debt? Also, the bank failures were a result of bonds losing value against the newly higher yielding bonds. Does this mean that all the governments that bought bonds have also lost tons of money?
Okay, lots embedded in that question. So first of all, these are mark-to-market losses. If you held them to maturity, you would get all of your coupon payments and your principal returned. Of that, I have little doubt. And so there's a little more than that at the banks that had runs. It was a combination of unrealized losses, paper losses, and a bank run on confidence. Banks are ultimately confidence schemes. And in the era of social media, it's very easy and quick to cause such a run, where moving your money out is just a few mouse clicks away. To the question of why, if everyone knows the U.S. isn't, quote, going to pay back their debt, I'm reminded of the old expression, which I first heard from Kyle Bass, is a rolling loan gathers no loss. In other words, you're betting on the U.S.'s ability to refinance it and to pay it back with new debt, and sort of the ultimate Ponzi economics. And because of the yield on offer, people are more than happy to take that chance that the U.S. will be able to refinance its debt, and it will get, you will get your money back. But then on top of that, which is where the question is kind of going to, the government can force banks to buy this debt. They could force 401k holders. They could pass a law tomorrow that says the average American must have at least 30% of their 401k in good, safe U.S. Treasury bills. And next thing you know, there's a forced incremental demand for U.S. government debt. And this has happened in other countries. It happens in the emerging economies all the time, where the banks are forced to load up on this bad paper because the government says they have to. And look, if the government came out tomorrow and mandated that all U.S. 401k plans must have 20, 30, 40, 50, 100% of their investment in U.S. Treasury bills and bonds, people would do it. And that's not an unlikely outcome. You'll see it'll be called retirement reform, or, there'll be all kinds of people on television saying that individual investors can't be trusted to manage their own accounts, and most of them lose money when they speculate in the stock market, and so on and so on and so on. But don't kid yourself. Like, there will be, if there's a lack of international buyers for U.S. debt, the government will make domestic people buy it. And that's kind of what they do with the banks. They sort of encourage them through regulation to load up on this paper. Now, it doesn't mean that they had to go so far out on the duration curve like they did at Silicon Valley Bank, especially when you consider the sort of flighty nature of their deposit base. There are much better run banks in the country that didn't fall for that trap. So there is certainly blame to be had and to be laid at the feet of management. But, the manner in which U.S. Treasury bills and government debt in general across the world is treated by regulators of banks means that it is especially favorable for those banks to hold it as part of their reserves. And that is a knob that governments will turn to force such debt onto the public.
All right. Well, Doomberg, we really appreciate your time today. If people are interested in learning more, they can go to doomberg.substack.com. Also, Doomberg T on Twitter. We'll put the links in the description of this video here. Did you have any last thoughts for our viewers? And can you explain a little bit about your service there over at Substack?
Yeah, sure. Appreciate the opportunity, Elijah, and really enjoyed the conversation. As always, great questions from your very knowledgeable fan base. As always, they've exceeded our expectations. You can find us at doomberg.substack.com. We publish 6 to 8 times a month. We're putting out a piece tomorrow. And, it's just the work of my life. It's amazing and fun that we could do this for a living. And despite sort of the name Doomberg and the sort of serious and heavy nature of the topics we often discuss when I come on your show, deep down, we're very optimistic people. We're bullish the U.S. We're bullish the American spirit. And we wish you and your friends and family a wonderful week. And thanks for the opportunity to come back on.
Thank you so much, Doomberg, and God bless.
God bless.
Miles Franklin Precious Metals is one of America's oldest and most trusted bullion dealers. Miles Franklin is A+ rated and accredited by the Better Business Bureau, licensed and bonded, and has 0 complaints ever registered. Here at Liberty and Finance, we are licensed brokers with Miles Franklin. To order, simply call us, discuss your needs, and we can let you know our live inventory, prices, and availability, and lock in your order over the phone. Once your order is locked, the price is held for you regardless of market fluctuations, and the metals are reserved for you awaiting your settled payment. Within 1 business day of ordering, you will receive an email invoice detailing the order and payment instructions. Miles Franklin accepts payments by bank wire, ACH or electronic check, money order, check mailed priority mail, and cryptocurrency. The fastest forms of payment are bank wire and cryptocurrency. Upon settled payment, metals will ship out within 3 to 5 business days. You will receive tracking information via email. Domestic shipping charges are $15 for any order under 500 ounces of silver or 10 ounces of gold. For orders larger than that, domestic shipping is free. The package will be boxed, fully insured, and labeled discreetly, with no indication of the contents inside. For your privacy, the name Miles Franklin will not even be on the package. To talk to myself, Kaiser, my brother Elijah, or my father Dunnigan, call 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237.